so you've come forward to come onto my platform here and say that there is a biolab network within Ukraine. You know, that's a pretty tall order to believe. Could you please tell the audience where do you get your information from and why should they believe you?
First of all, of course, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's all based on very well-known facts. For many years, you can just look and do your own search using some Department of Defense websites and investigating their programs and looking at their budgets. What are they doing? What they do finance? What the names of the programs, and they are doing it for many years actually, and you just simple connect all the dots and get the full picture, or maybe not the full, but at least big picture of what they are doing. And I have to say that it's all based on facts, on documents, and you just can easily double check what's there and do your own research. So you don't need to believe words or something. You just look at the publications and documents. You look at their videos published by the Department of Defense and so on.
Okay, so what specific projects has the American Department of Defense been running on the territory of the Ukraine? Let's go back to the beginning of all this, from the start.
It's all start, I believe, at 1998, or maybe a little bit earlier, with the collapse of Soviet Union, when Americans started basically investigating what was the Soviet defense program. And of course, one of their point of interest was Soviet biological weapon program. And so they started collect a lot of information, and they started basically investing a lot of money and into these investigations and proposing some programs. They call it defense threat reduction programs, and offering those governments of new states like Ukraine and Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and many other former Soviet states to work together on this program in terms of, or the idea was to make these threats from biological weapons less, just make it not a threat again. So if you know what I mean. And the most active part, if we're talking about Ukraine, started at 2005, when American Department of Defense, they signed an agreement with Ukrainian Ministry of Healthcare, and saying that they will set up a dozen of laboratories all across the Ukraine, and they invest in the equipment, building the laboratories, and all the results of their work. Basically, they will go back to the US, to the Pentagon, and the Pentagon basically will own all these results of their work, and all these works will be under full control of Pentagon specialists.
So when the Soviet Union collapsed, or was broken up, or betrayed from the inside, however you want to look at that particular moment in history, basically the Russian Federation really carried on the legacy in a legal sense of the Soviet Union. So especially the Ukraine and Kazakhstan were supposed to return all of their biological and nuclear weapons sort of to Russia, and then become more neutral and unarmed states. And from what I understand, they did do that. So maybe what you're just kind of talking about is you're mistaking things here. I mean, there was a program to sort of move biological nuclear agents back to Russia, and didn't that program kind of work? What I mean to say is, aren't all those weapons gone since the early 90s?
That's right, and you're right that was only the part of the project. Yes, indeed, all the nuclear and biological weapons were just moved back to Russia, or they've been and the carriers of these weapons they were basically just destroyed. However, the laboratories, the scientists, and the samples, if we are talking about the biological weapon or or its sample of diseases or viruses, they still kept at those countries at the laboratories. So those collections of these bacteria or viruses, they were not moved to any other location except the US, of course. So, and Ukraine still has thousands of the samples of these agents, biological agents, or viruses, coronaviruses, and many others. Either it's human diseases or non-human, like animal diseases. So this is the idea is to control all these collections and to control these and finance these studies or researches in these countries. They really finance these researches, these studies on, if we are talking about Ukraine, on the Ukraine territory, they have 12 or huge reference laboratories all across Ukraine. They have 3 laboratories in Kiev, in Lvov, in Kharkiv, in Odessa, in all main cities where they still work and they still make researches of very specific diseases like leptospirosis or new sorts of flu on people. They have really separate projects on that. They have this project have names, and they have separate programs. So they still doing new researches on both either on people or on animals, and so you can see the information.
Okay, so what's the scale of this all? How many biological weapons and laboratories are we talking about? And what's their potential?
At the moment, we know about 12 or 13 huge laboratories in Ukraine, but we also know that the network of these laboratories is way larger on Ukraine. It's roughly 300 smaller laboratories, and from 12 to 15 large reference laboratories with they have 2 laboratories with biological safety level 3. It's very high level, and other laboratories have lower level of biological safety. So it's I believe that it's can be extended in quite short time, and but another thing to mention here is that what they do at the moment is that they do conduct some researches on new medicines, on new substances, pharmaceutical substances, on local citizens, on Ukrainians, and they don't perform it somewhere probably in the US, but they do it on Ukrainians, and they doing it on purpose.
To be clear, you're talking about pharmaceutical testing, not weapons testing, right?
Exactly. Pharmaceutical tests, they have been conducted by Pfizer and Merck companies, and people are just wondering, of course, if these pills are very expensive and Ukrainians just don't have money to buy them. Let's say the treatment would cost $700. So yeah, and they just don't have money. So why they do it in Ukraine? Obviously, it's not for the Ukrainians. Just they're searching for side effects, of course, and they are doing it for free. These people, these, let's say, volunteers, or maybe they are not just not paid for that, and the results, as always, they're kind of secret, they're confidential. No one can get any access to those results. So and these programs, they are huge, and Ukrainian government, they're pushing some laws which would allow this big pharma to introduce the new tabs or pharmaceutical substances very easily and very fast on the Ukrainian market without proper testing.
Now, if I were the American government, again, I'm kind of skeptical of the effectiveness of bioweapons, but if I were to run that program, I would want to have it somewhere in a very remote location in Nevada or maybe the northern part of Alaska. So, if some mistakes were to happen, perhaps they could be caught in time. And most importantly, wouldn't you want to have all American-born employees running that kind of operation? It seems a little bit dangerous to leave it in the hands of foreigners.
Exactly. This is maybe it's the main question why they're doing it in not at the desert, but in the cities with a population over 1 million people actually. Or they're doing it, they have their laboratories with the huge airports, basically it's hubs, right? And with huge traffic. And so we just researching the documents, we can understand that this is very important for them to have these laboratories and make these researches in a highly populated area. And Ukraine is really kind of very sweet for the American Department of Defense in this sense, because of its population, and they have infrastructure, they have scientists, and their government is really controllable, because in some other countries, government or people just stood against these experiments and just kicked off these laboratories from their countries, like they did in Kyrgyzstan or in Belarus, which they were part of that program. And I have to say that in 2013, Yanukovych government, they started asking questions. What? Guys, we don't have an access to the results. What are you doing here? Our inspections cannot go to these laboratories. So what's going on there? And then 2014, and they call it revolution, but it was coup de main, right? So it came, and now these laboratories are fine, they are working, and they have even more programs.
So, now I'm starting to get the picture that maybe if Russia were to go in to Ukraine and try to save the Donbass, it could affect America in a way that's not really mentioned in the headlines of major media sources. So, what would happen if Russia were to go in and take back what it wants?
I cannot imagine such a situation, actually, when Russia military acts and and yeah, it's I don't see how that would affect American defense. It's for me it's just nonsense. But of course, American government and the Pentagon they're saying it's uh, where they're just pushing this narrative that Russia is going to do something military, some military action against Ukraine, and they're pushing this narrative, and they they have to control everything on Ukraine, uh, including these laboratories and so on and so forth. But I believe it's not the case, and never will be the case.
During Trump's time, he really shifted the logic of American foreign policy. He declared that China is the real threat to America. They're sort of enemy number one. And to an extent, Biden kind of agrees with him. So we've had a major shift. But before that, since 9/11, the enemy has been radical Islamic terrorism. Now, when we think about it, how could biological weapons stop radical Islamic terrorism? How does this all work?
Yes, I would say that we have to understand that biological weapon itself is it's a little bit very specific term, because to make a weapon it should be it has to have the characteristic some features of the weapon. It has to be a carrier of this weapon, right? You have to use it in very certain conditions. But diseases is something really different. When let's take this COVID, for instance, like SARS-CoV-2, okay? In after the year of the pandemic, the total amount of this coronavirus was, let's say, 2 teaspoons. So now you can imagine how this coronavirus is, or how this biological or bacteriological weapon is powerful. So you can infect literally millions of people just using very small amount of something. So we have really to separate this kind of biological terrorism and biological weapon from here.
You know, this discussion we're having is starting to make me a little nervous, to be honest. You know, in the Ukraine, they've had relatively recently, historically speaking, 2 revolutions. I mean, the eastern part of the country is at war. This is a pretty unstable situation. What happens if a third revolution occurs in Ukraine? Could the cat be let out of the bag?
I think yes, Ukraine is unstable. It's basically it's failed state. But when we say it is unstable, it's really unstable from maybe from its economical standpoint. None of the industries are there. It was the leading country in space, in aeronautics, in naval, in automotive industry, in everything, and now they have nothing. People are really poor, and but you were saying globally it's not unstable. It is very stable because it's fully dependable and fully controlled from the US, and it really depends on European Union and from Brussels and it really depends on financing from the US. So it's from this standpoint it's very stable state.
What you're claiming, sir, is pretty darn scary. Now, if you're telling the truth and you want the audience to believe you, what should they do about this? What should our English-speaking audience do with this information? What is your end goal with exposing all of this?
Honestly, I don't really think that common people can do anything with that, just basically just start asking questions why the American government investing hundreds of millions of dollars into all these laboratories somewhere, actually not only in Ukraine but all over the world. On Ukraine, it's $250 million have already been invested in these laboratories, and they have these biological laboratories all across the globe. So of course it's again not against. It's very strange situation because so just ask questions. Yeah, what, why? Pentagon is so interested in these countries because to me it's not for the good of those people who are living there, right? So basically it's again it's against someone. So to me it seems better, there are way better ways how to spend taxpayers' money. And of course there is a huge field of corruption in such programs, since the defense programs, and you can never have an access to financial reports or the results of these programs. So you just need to be aware what's going on. And when someone starts saying it's a conspiracy theory or something like that, so you, in this case, the bell should start ringing and saying, hey, it's not a conspiracy, it is a real program, and they have been conducted for at least 15 or many years, and in the future I'm sure that we will see even more information popping up here and there about these programs, or maybe even more interesting